students in your program. So good afternoon, I'm Pat Whitlow. I'm with the Office of Nationally Competitive Awards. I'm so appreciative that you would take the time to sign on and do an online information session. We're getting used to these. This is our fourth one now, and they're going pretty well. So, you know, this remote study and work time is teaching me a few things, as it is everybody, I guess. I want to introduce the graduate student that we're featuring, Anahid Matassian, who is a PhD student in anthropology. And she had applied for a Fulbright several years ago and actually did it a couple of years ago. And so I'm going to share some slides from Fulbright and talk a little bit about the program overall, and then allow Anahid to share the story of her year. And then we'll talk a little bit about the specifics of how the application process works. And what we said, I think when you come in, for those of you who are muted, you're automatically muted, but feel free to unmute yourself if you want to ask a question as we go along. Because we're going to be relatively small, maybe, you know, under 15, we can, I think, handle questions as you have them, but we'll also have time at the end for questions. So people feel free. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you, a PowerPoint presentation, just so we have a little something to guide us. Excuse me, if I can get it to. Well, it does not want to go full. Oh. Emily, can you tell me what I'm doing wrong then?
Will it let you click on, it won't let you click on from beginning?
It just won't go. It appears to be stuck. That is annoying. Well, I'll keep clicking on it and trying. So at the moment, I seem to have done something where I've got it a little stuck, but I will figure it out because eventually I do these things. But in the meantime, just to share a little bit about how it works. If you are an applicant in the UK cohort, you're applying through this office, Nationally Competitive Awards, and I am, you know, ordinarily would meet with you or talk to you through the Funkhauser building, but I can do a Zoom meeting with you or a call or whatever afterwards if you want to talk about it, your particular application process. And we'll give you feedback, so I'm happy to answer any questions that you have, read your essays. I mean, our goal is to help you have the strongest application that we feel like you can. The campus deadline for Fulbright will be Thursday, September 10th. And so you want to just keep that in mind. And I know it sounds like a ton of time, it always does, and it comes up on us quite quickly, particularly I think for the research grants. Because there are some slightly different requirements from some of the other Fulbrights, and so we'll talk about those later. But if you'll put that in your calendar, and then we'll do campus interviews. And the campus interviews are quite friendly. It's faculty reviewers who want to ask you questions about your research proposal and help you be a stronger candidate. It does not prevent you from being forwarded for the Fulbright, because all candidates go forward. Well, and I already introduced Anahid. Just to give you a slight history of the Fulbright, I won't really go over these. We just want them to be in there for people who don't participate in the conversation, so they have this information, and so you're aware. But it's been going on for a long time. We've had lots of UK student Fulbrighters, and they've had really good experiences. It is open to anyone. It is open to you at all ranges of your educational program. I know we have both undergraduates on this call and graduate students. You can go as a student, and you can actually even go in between programs, and you can be part of the UK cohort. So I always work with alums on this program too. So it's very friendly that way. There are some specifications though to eligibility, and so you do have to be a US citizen by the time you would apply. And you would have to complete your bachelor's degree. So for those of you who are undergraduates on the call, you are going to be applying in the fall of your senior year to take up a grant after you graduate. and you cannot have completed your doctorate at the time of application. There is a faculty Fulbright program. Let me give you a quick warning about that. You are going to look for this Fulbright U.S. student program when you're looking for more information about it and looking for the application. There is another Fulbright Scholar program, and that is for faculty and people who have terminal degrees in their fields. So you want to be really specific about getting the Fulbright U.S. program. And then just a basic glimpse of kind of how many awards there are and how long you go. So you can see it's pretty broad. There are a lot of Fulbrighters that go out every year. There are a lot of countries. Obviously, this was an extremely unusual year. For any of you who have talked to Fulbrighters who were in the field and had to come home to the U.S., I just found out one of our Fulbrighters that I thought got home didn't, and has actually stayed in her host country. So that's a very unusual situation, but she is safe and continuing with her research. But most Fulbrighters had to get called home in the beginning of their grants. But having given those few basic details, what I'd like to do is turn it over to Anna Heed now and let her talk about her particular experience, because I think that will be more interesting to all of you, and that's actually what you came to talk about.
All right. Should I just go ahead?
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. My name is, actually, it's pronounced Anahid Matosian, but that's okay.
Oh, sorry.
Don't worry about it. It's all right. I'm used to it. As you mentioned earlier, I'm a PhD candidate in anthropology. I'm writing my dissertation now, and it's a long process. But yeah, from 2018 to 2019, I was in Yerevan, Armenia. My name is actually Armenian too, so I am of Armenian descent. So I feel like that did play some role in the decision process to go there. I chose to work on the topic, which is Syrian Armenian women in Armenia, because I have family who lives in Syria during the war, and that's why I came to get my PhD, is I was interested in learning about women's experiences of displacement and integration in a host country, especially a country like Armenia, which, you know, they share an ethnicity, but that doesn't always mean that integration is going to be smooth. So I was really interested in that. So the images on the screen right now, the one on the left, like with the little market with the text in Armenian, that means Halepi Shuka, which means Aleppo shopping center. So there they had like a lot of women-owned small businesses, like selling spices and other groceries or even jewelry. And I would spend a lot of my time doing what we call in anthropology participant observation. And some of you might be familiar with that too in other fields. I think I've heard some behavioral scientists out there. So we're in very similar areas. So the goal is to get to know the people that you're studying by just spending time and establishing rapport, getting to know them basically. So that was the crux of my time there. I also did, and the person on the right side of the screen, that's my friend Hayasa. And the mountain in the background is Mount Ararat, which is a very famous mountain. And it's not in Armenia, it's actually in Turkey. The Armenians claim it. So my goal was to go to Armenia and talk to ethnic Armenian women from Syria who have been displaced to Armenia. And Armenia offers faster citizenship processes on the basis of ethnicity. So in order to find an affiliation, which I was also asked to talk about, I chose to work with UNHCR, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, which is not a very typical host affiliation. But I learned from previous experiences and previous trips to Armenia that this was an important institution. I also want to mention that I did not get Fulbright the first time I applied. This was way before graduate school. This was actually in 2014. Instead of going to Fulbright, though, I got a real job, which actually helps me now in the job hunt path. So don't despair if you don't get it. I tried again 4 years later, and I got it, which is really validating. I think it's more validating if you don't get it the first time. So don't worry about that. And for the affiliation, I built on previous trips to Armenia and contacts. Obviously, not everyone can do that. So what I did was you research the concerns and the needs of the country that you're going to. So I knew that the Syrian conflict is a really big event, like we all know here. And I knew that Armenia was concerned about migration and integrating people. So you just look up the important actors there, and you reach out to them. And networking helps a lot. So that's what I would recommend for finding a affiliation institution. Also, in terms of non-research activities, like I mentioned, that research involved going to stop by shops like you see on the screen, or I would even participate in embroidery workshops, which is taught to women who don't necessarily have skills needed to enter the labor force. So they're taught these skills that they already had and used as hobbies in Syria, and they're learning to use those skills as a way to earn a living in Armenia. So to, acquire new skills, basically, instead of being housewives, because they need to work. So aside from participating in embroidery workshops taught by NGOs, or going to just any Syrian event I can find, and going to Syrian restaurants, I would also volunteer as an English editor for one of those non-government organizations. And I would volunteer at dog shelters even, because I also brought my dog with me to Armenia, which really helped a lot emotionally, and it's possible, but it depends on the country you're going to, but you have to do a lot of research on that too. So I was also asked to write a blog post, like an entire blog about bringing my dog to Armenia. And the catch was this was for an organization that focused on repatriation, or luring like other Armenian Americans like myself to move to Armenia permanently. Obviously, that wasn't what I was doing. I was just going there for PhD research and coming back. But my blog served a purpose, and that was one way of giving back in a way, even though it was very politically motivated. Yeah, so that was my proposal in a nutshell. And the main takeaway I want you to have is don't despair, and you're always welcome to reach out to me even after this about reviewing essays or questions about finding a letter of affiliation, especially. Okay. I don't know if you want me to talk more about that, or if there's time for questions.
Well, I have the next slide, but first I should ask, does anybody have any questions? Would you like to speak up or send it in on the chat function? I don't see anyone, but feel free.
Mm-hmm.
But I thought that I would bring this up for people because I always get this question.
Mm-hmm.
And, but I thought you could maybe talk about it more in terms of having actually had the grant and experienced the benefits, sort of the ones that you found most helpful or that you've accessed. I mean, certainly the in-country ones, but
Mm-hmm.
but maybe in terms of these possible benefits. For example, I didn't know you were allowed to bring your dog, you know.
Yeah, Fulbright, I looked at the policies carefully, and it didn't say anything about not bringing a dog or being able to. It didn't mention that at all. So I checked with the Fulbright program there, and no one seemed to care. They just said, it's your responsibility to research the policies and stuff like that. So I didn't get into trouble, but a benefit that I did know that I learned about probably too late was the counseling, which is really, really helpful because you're isolated. I don't know how many of y'all have studied abroad before. I didn't really. I just did research trips abroad for like a couple months at a time maybe, but not 9 months straight. And that was really hard after some time. So Fulbright does offer some counseling, and I really benefited from that. Yes, which is not mentioned here. Also a monthly stipend that obviously helped, of course. They also, something that I really liked about Fulbright is they let you do your own research on your own time, and they weren't kind of lurking over your shoulder, which is really, really important when you're trying to learn about a certain community and you're there to serve a purpose. You're not necessarily, you are under an institution, but I like that they gave you freedom and they would check in every few months or so, which is helpful.
How did your stipend work in the sense of, I've always heard from Fulbrighters that it was perfectly adequate and often extra, they had money for travel. Did you find that to be the case?
Well, I had to travel I say that like I'm forced to, but I had to travel every few months to go to, you have to leave the country every 90 days just so your visa is okay. So I would go to, where did I go? For Christmas time, I went to London and Germany, and Then in February, actually on Valentine's Day, went to Ukraine and Chernobyl, which is not the most romantic place, but you know, whatever. And then later I went to Switzerland. So yes.
I don't think that leaving every 90 days is true of every Fulbright visa.
No, this is just for Armenia specifically. You're correct.
Okay.
Right. So, and also I want to mention that from that part of the world, it was easier to travel. It's not like coming from the US where it is more expensive. You are closer. Like going to Ukraine, it costs like $200 round trip from Armenia, which is not the case if you're flying from, my family lives in Detroit. So, we see language lessons. Well, my Armenian was already functional, but it improved through integration and talking to neighbors. They were pretty, I don't want to say nosy because they meant well. They would check in on me and invite me over for coffee. So, and they didn't know any English, which is better for me to work on my Armenian. Yeah, I'm trying to see what else is on the screen that I can tell you with. Yes, in the round trip airfare, I would just recommend listening to whatever Fulbright tells you. Like if they say we need you to send us this information as soon as possible, just jump on that and don't let it sit around. Okay, monthly stipend, but yes, it was adequate, certainly, especially, I mean, depending on the country that you're living in. In Armenia, the exchange rate was in our favor, on the US favor, and it definitely helped a lot.
And just to talk a little bit about the application components, I just want to make people aware when you go to the Fulbright website, if you look at the applicants tab, there is a lot of good information for applicants that will help you to understand what they're looking for. I will also be happy to answer questions. But there is an online application and it is open and you can go ahead and set up an account and use your, wouldn't you know, my office phone would start ringing right now, but you can go ahead and set up an account and set your own password and then you can go in and out of it as you choose. Then for these essays, these are really the heart of the application. The statement of grant purpose, in essence, is a research proposal, and you only have 2 pages, and it's quite a challenge, isn't it?
Yeah, especially from a graduate program too.
And then you have a personal statement, and this is true of everyone's Fulbright, and this is where they want to learn more about you as a person. And so personal statements can vary quite a bit. I really caution people about making them an expanded resume. Fulbright is not as much interested in, well, I did this, and then I went there, and then I did this. They're really interested in getting a sense of your values and who you are and experiences you've had. One important thing to keep in mind, even though they really want to support you in your research or in English teaching assistantship, which is another option, or in a graduate study, they really also want cultural exchange. That's a primary value of Fulbright. And so you also want to keep that in mind as you're filling out your application and your personal statement, because you want to show yourself as the person that we would send, who would be a good sort of quasi-ambassador for the US and that really wants to get out and learn the country and speak to people. Depending on the country, you have to have a foreign language evaluation. Anhi, did you need that?
Honestly, I don't really recall. I don't think I did, actually.
Okay. Some countries do not require it at all, or they require it. They may only require some language ability if you're really needing that for your research. You will have 3 references, and I put online form there. I'm sorry, that actually is not correct. You need 3 letters of reference. And for a research application, you really do, I think, want people who know your research and know your field. So you're not looking for a character reference. You're really looking at probably your faculty mentors. This letter of affiliation that we'll talk about a little bit more. And then there is a campus committee evaluation. And this is, we try to be as helpful as we can to candidates, looking at your whole application and then bringing out the strengths. An unofficial transcript is perfectly acceptable to go forward in the application, so I encourage you to do that so that you don't have to, pay for that. Why don't you talk a little bit about the process of getting your letter of affiliation?
Sure. I also want to point out quickly before I forget, the image on the screen is, I forgot to add that in order, part of the cultural exchange part that I thought of and that was requested, not necessarily by Fulbright, but by my department, anthropology, and my other grant that I got to finish research last summer from a South Caucasus Research Institute, was to give public talks at obviously UNHCR, which had asked me to be transparent about my research, and you have to respect that, and it wasn't an issue for me. I wanted to give back to the people that I talked to anyway, and you helped me. So I gave 2 talks. One was at UNHCR, another was at a local university, International University, something. So that's what the image on the screen is about. As for the letter of affiliation, how to do that, honestly, it was kind of crazy. Like it ended up, because of the 9-hour time difference, sometimes I was up until 2 a.m. literally trying to get this letter and on the phone with Armenia. But that's just my case, and they were willing to work with me. So it was like 2 a.m. for me and 11 a.m. for them. So they had the advantage. I was going to get that letter. And they were like, so you had to send them a template or some information, because some people may not be familiar with what a letter of affiliation is, especially if they've never written one before or worked with Fulbright before. So I drafted a template. I did research on how my work would be beneficial to their organization, but also making it very clear that this was my research and that I wasn't working for UNHCR. I'm not employed by UNHCR. And you have to be very clear about those boundaries, but also be respectful. So it's kind of a hard line to balance, but it's possible. So that's what I was on the phone with until 2 a.m. and it worked. So I would recommend being persistent and making clear that boundaries are understood, but also that you're not just using them as well, and you can give back. Like if you can give a public talk about your research, if you're okay with that, then I would suggest doing that as well.
Another thing about this, for many students, this is an intimidating part of the application. And so I often recommend that you think about, for this letter of affiliation, that you often work initially with some of your own faculty mentors here, because they may know someone in the host country, and they can give you an initial introduction that would allow you to start, and you don't have to, just send an email to a person that you have no connection to whatsoever. I also encourage you to read very carefully the grant description on the Fulbright website for the country that you're looking at, because that will also have some possible restrictions on who can be your affiliate in the host country. For example, some countries require it to come from a university faculty member at a university. And obviously you didn't have that requirement. You were able, some countries allow you to go with a nonprofit organization or a government ministry. It can vary. But that's something that as you're reading the information about your grant and your application, it will help you understand how to approach that. Do we have any questions at this point about the application?
Did you have to do any type of interview other than the campus interview?
You know what? I don't know if Dr. Whitlow can refresh my memory on this. I don't recall ever having a campus interview. I recall going to Dr. Whitlow's office, but maybe it was just because of my region, and she helped me like go over my essay. I do remember that part, and you gave me really helpful feedback for that. But I don't recall any other interviews per se.
Well, we usually do an interview with the faculty committee. So if we didn't do one for you, then there must have been some unusual circumstance about your particular grant. But usually we have people interview on campus with a small faculty committee, and you get feedback that helps you revise your application going forward. So that usually is a part of the process. And sometimes you get interviewed. The way the cycle works is you apply on your campus in the early fall. It gets submitted to Fulbright in October. There is a national review committee of U.S. faculty in November and December. They make decisions about who are the semifinalists, and these are the people that are being referred to the host country. So you should hear usually in January, about whether or not you're a semifinalist. And at that point, sometimes the host countries will ask to interview you. And that, of course, is always online, and it's very brief, like 10 minutes. And it's usually just a quick check-in with you about what you plan to do. Did you have one of those host country interviews?
No, actually.
Okay, so some countries do not do that. They have started, a few more countries have started doing that in recent years. And then you usually hear in the late spring about the award. For example, now, even this year, with everything that's going on, we have been hearing about our semifinalists. We're only waiting to hear about one more. And so they have been getting the response. They're either getting the grant or not getting the grant, or we have an alternate. So you will hear about that in the late spring. And if you are recommended to be a semifinalist to the host country, that's obviously wonderful. Your odds just went way up, and it's really great, but it doesn't necessarily mean you will get the grant. So I do always say to candidates to have other options working. So either another way that you would fund your PhD research, or you're also looking for work at the same time as you're applying for Fulbright, so that you don't sort of not get the Fulbright grant and then you're not quite sure what your next step is. So here are some of the factors in selection, and I will let people read about that. They can really vary according to what your host country grant description requests. Obviously, the quality and feasibility of the proposal is key. They will allow people to come, when you say academic or professional record, some of our PhD students do have a lot of experience already. They may have been out and work, they've done other degrees, but they will also, undergraduates do go and do research years right after their undergraduate years, and we've had several Fulbrighters in that category. And then, as we say, depending on whether or not you need language. And so these things vary tremendously. And in general, Fulbright is pretty flexible. So that's really nice because it can go across a wide range of students and their needs. We talked a little bit about the application timeline, and I just talked a little bit about the process earlier, but here's just to give you a visual representation and a reminder. So we do this campus process where you submit, we review, and then you get a chance to revise and resubmit, and then it has to go forward on the 13th, and it has to go through my office. So I have to have time. I usually have to have it in like a week before that so that we can attach all the documents and make sure there are no errors. It's amazing how sometimes in the last rush to get everything done, errors creep in. And so we try to get those corrected, and then they get this national screening and then the host country review. There is a lot of resource available from Fulbright online. There are webinars. We have Fulbrighters that are back here at UK that are happy to talk to you. So there's lots of ways to get feedback for Fulbright if you have any questions. And then also just want to make you aware, for those of you who are interested in other types of awards, if you want to follow the Nationally Competitive Awards Office here at UK, either by Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, we post regularly awards and award deadlines and links, even when they're not awards that we work with a lot. Sometimes there are awards that come along very rarely, and we have to focus on the ones that more students are applying for. But we're also always willing to help you with any award application that you have, and we want to make students aware of the wide range of opportunities that are out there. So I hope that you'll think about following us on one of these mediums so that we can keep you updated about things that are going on. Any other comments, Anahim, before we throw it open to questions again?
One thing I forgot to add was, just like Dr. Whitlow mentioned about having backup funding options, I would recommend having backup options for host institutions in case this one doesn't pan out for whatever reason or people are uncomfortable. Do research on similar organizations or universities that you think you'd be a good fit for, just to have that like in your little arsenal. That's all. That's all.
Thank you. Other questions that people have? Um,
Is it Anahid?
Yeah.
Okay, just want to make sure. Thank you for speaking tonight. My question, one of them, just when you are applying for a specific program or in a certain country, is there a possibility that you might get accepted, but not to the country that you necessarily want to be in? They might give you other options, or is it kind of like if you don't get that one, then you don't get the Fulbright?
That's a good question. I'm not really sure how to answer that, to be honest, because I only was zeroed in on Armenia. That's where my, because I was not going to write another dissertation proposal. It's like one and done. And I'm sure people here are familiar with writing proposals for masters or whatever, other programs as well. So I was really zeroed in on Armenia. I think what you're describing, it sounds a little bit like maybe Peace Corps. I'm not really sure how that works either. Maybe people have more experience, but for me, the answer would be no, and I don't know the answer to your question. I'm sorry.
well, Fulbright will only allow you to apply for one type of grant in one country.
Oh.
So for the most case, it would be that you will get an award for that Armenia or not, right? That would be the case.
Right.
But it has happened a couple of times in the last few years, and always for ETAs, never for research. But for example, we had a student accepted to go to Venezuela on a Fulbright, and the situation continued to get worse and worse and worse. And Fulbright kept saying, "Oh, she'll be safe. She's going to go." And I was like, "Really?" And so in the end, in the early summer, in fact, they said, "Okay, we can't send them to Venezuela. We're going to send them to Paraguay instead." And so she did, and she went, and she had a fabulous experience. And that has happened a couple of times. We had a student get a Fulbright to Macau, and then Macau was supposed to accept all 6 ETAs, and they decided to only give visas for 3 for reasons that nobody knew. And so she wound up in Hong Kong. So we've had a couple of those, but only with the English Teaching Assistant Awards, and it's still pretty uncommon. But with the research, I've never heard of that being done where it's switched.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Any questions?
I actually had one question. When
Hannah?
you were describing the affiliation letter to your institution, you mentioned being clear about boundaries. I was wondering if you could elaborate on like what kind of boundary you mean by that.
Well, I knew because I had been to Armenia before, not just for my own background and for volunteering in the past since I was 18, but also for previous research trips, like short term. I knew I had a main contact at the organization. And what I meant by boundaries, it wasn't like they were being hostile or anything. It was just managing expectations that she would tell me what she wanted me to research. And I'm like, I already have my dissertation proposal and my project. This is what I want to do. And so we negotiated that. But then, I tailored my dissertation proposal, well, not dissertation proposal. I tailored my service in Armenia to their needs as well. So okay, this organization is interested in integration and they want to focus on women. Well, that's exactly what I want to do too. So this works out perfectly. So what I meant by boundaries is trying to tell them that I'm not working for you. I'm a US Fulbright student. I'm here on a research grant. Fulbright is paying me. UNHCR is not. They are my host institution, and this is what I'll do here. I need your help with finding people I can talk to. Or do I have your blessing or permission to go to certain events or meetings or workshops? Yes? Okay. In response, this is what I can do for you. I can write some blurbs. I can give some public talks. I'm not comfortable revealing information about participants just for ethical reasons, and they didn't ask me to, except maybe on one occasion. So that's when we had to just remember your purpose there and the purpose of the research.
And this can depend a lot to the type of research you're doing and the type of affiliate. So for example, we sometimes have students who are going to do science research where they're actually in a lab at a university, because they need access to resources and stuff. But they're technically not doing that faculty member's research. They may be involved in some kind of joint project, but the student always has to have, or the Fulbrighter has to have, a portion that is their own research. In general, you're not asking the affiliate for financial support, except in the case of sometimes scientists, it is permission to use the equipment and the lab things. But you're usually asking for access, as Anahid was saying. You know, maybe they're going to introduce you to a population, or help you make contacts with an organization, or that kind of thing. I think we had a geography student a few years ago that went on a Fulbright to Jordan, and her affiliate was actually an olive growers association, because she was doing something about interviewing people who in that industry, and they were the best way for her to get contact to growers of olives and buyers of olives. And, you know, so the affiliates can really vary depending on the needs of your project and what kind of access you're looking for to a research population or a site. Or sometimes, but we've also had students who went abroad to do research in archives, for example. So it was all, you know, in essence, library research. It wasn't interviews, or, and so sometimes we've had the head of an archives would be the affiliate, because they would say, yeah, we'll treat them like a visiting scholar. So we'll give them a kind of a kiosk, you know, a little area in the archives, and they can come and check out the various sources that they need, and then write and research from there.
Yeah, so UNHCR, you're exactly right. They did give me access. I had a little bit of access before to, in my situation, I was going to Armenia to talk to kind of 3 different groups. Syrian Armenian women, so ethnic Armenian women from Syria. They're not really called refugees, so they're like a migrant population. So I needed UNHCR's access to kind of point me in the right direction. Also, I was talking to UN employees, NGO workers, and government workers, so people serving migrant populations. And also I wanted to talk to non-migrant and non-government workers who were affiliated with those populations but didn't fit either of those categories. So it was pretty strategic, and I think I learned a lot from being rejected the first time. That's why I want to pass this on to you, is be persistent. And also, what I learned from that is my previous proposal had focused more on too many different populations. I wanted to talk to migrant populations from Azerbaijan, Syria, and Iraq. And this time I only focused on Syrians. So I made it more manageable, and I really zeroed in on the needs of like Armenian news at the time. What were they most worried about? And I made it more manageable and easier to ultimately conduct a dissertation on, instead of just doing 3 different populations, which is a lot of work. It would take more than 9 months. Yeah, I hope that answered questions.
Did you have some sort of mentor or supervisor or just some leadership that you could collaborate with or ask questions to when you were stuck on your research or something like that?
In my department, no. There's one professor who works in the South Caucasus in Georgia, but she's worked there like 10 years ago, and she is a different anthropology. She's a medical anthropologist. So it wasn't really that. I consulted with her a few times, but for the most part, not to sound arrogant or anything, but in terms of my committee, I was the one that was most familiar with this particular country in terms of going there, and my research and my background did help a little bit, not as much as I thought. So I was kind of my own mentor, I hate to say it, but I also was definitely helped by a lot of different people like Dr. Whitlow. My committee would help me tell me from like a proposal perspective, this is really not feasible, or this is really easy to handle. In terms of a mentor for that, I did reach out to other Fulbright alumni working in that country. You can look that up, and I did, and I reached out to them, and now I'm kind of passing it on to other people who are going to Armenia. So far, there's been 2 applicants for research going to Armenia that have been accepted, not at UK obviously, but for other universities. And so I would really recommend that. Look up, and I think you can do that on the Fulbright website, look at the alumni for the country that you're interested in. Reach out to them. The worst that can happen is they won't answer or say no, but at least you tried.
That's really good advice. Thank you. I saw that you were able to see who had gone the previous years and where they went. But I didn't think about like reaching out to them once you maybe had been accepted or something. But thank you. It's good. It's a good advice.
Yeah, and what was kind of funny is I met the person who got my Fulbright 4 years ago, and I met him in Armenia, and we're actually friends now. So if you don't get it this time, you will at some point. And he's actually not a hateful person.
Will you talk a little bit about how they handled orientation and ongoing support of Fulbrighters? I know in countries that have a Fulbright commission, that can be a tighter relationship, and in countries that don't, you're interacting with the consulate or the embassy, and sometimes that's a little looser.
Yeah, I have some critiques of this too, not just Fulbright, but of the embassy. Well, I'll start with the pros. Yes, we had an orientation, and they also had this like reception where you would invite your, in anthropology, maybe in other fields you call it gatekeeper, but like my main contact at UNHCR, I invited her to attend with me because she was helping me a lot, immensely with research. So they did have a few receptions at the beginning, and sometimes some State Department employees would invite me over for Thanksgiving. So that was really nice. And but they, as I mentioned earlier, they weren't really on top of you, and it was more if you reach out, they'll respond, but not like they're on your back all the time, which is good. My critiques, as I mentioned earlier, was I thought the U.S. Embassy did downplay certain aspects of safety, particularly, I think, are most of the participants here women? Like, yeah, not that it necessarily really matters, but I feel like it was kind of downplayed. And I did have some issues with that, unfortunately. So I think, and I gave my critique to Fulbright saying that you need to not sugarcoat things as much and just be like, yes, there are issues that happen in this country just like any other country in the world, and just to make sure that you mention that. I think it's important to be transparent. But yes, there were orientations which were helpful, and I got to meet, there was one other researcher that I was working with. She was an anthropologist too. She was actually an archaeologist, so we're at like the same point in the program at different schools. She was at Cornell, I'm at UK. So, and we're friends now. So it was really helpful to have, especially another female PhD candidate there as well to talk to, who was from a similar background. And we kind of bonded together for that. And so we spent a lot of time together. Can you guys hear me? Okay, but my speaker was not working. And there were 2 English teaching guys, and they're also Armenian American as well. So actually, what was interesting was the majority of us 4 were Armenian American except for 1. I don't know if that was intentional or they didn't really care about ethnic background, but I wasn't complaining. So.
You know, one thing too, just to know for those of you who will, I mean, you'll probably be applying for a range of countries. That is one of the helpful things, is that they, in the beginning, will make sure that you're introduced to all the Fulbrighters in the country. And so that might be the English Teaching Award, it could be graduate students, research, and also the faculty Fulbrighters who might be there that year teaching in the country. And so that can be very useful to have those contacts. In some countries, they will bring all those people together at sort of a midterm break. So those tend to be countries where they have a Fulbright commission. And so maybe there's a little more money to do that. So I know they do that in Germany and the United Kingdom and Malaysia. And, you know, so there's several countries where they bring them back together. And so that's one thing to think about too. In some countries where they have more, if you're worried, you know, about not having some support and people to reach out to, you might consider a country where they offer more grants, because then there are more people. Now, given that you have a research grant, you may be in a part of the country doing your research on whatever, and all the other Fulbrights might be in other parts of the country. So I'm not suggesting that you'll be on top of them necessarily, but you will know they're there, and you will have connections. And it is often true that Fulbrighters will travel to meet with each other in different parts of the country, you know, go to each other's locations when possible, because they met each other early in the Fulbright year. And then that's, you know, those are relationships that are helpful. They're a little bit comforting or a little bit familiar. sometimes in a research site that's very, you know, that you're not used to. It's not comfortable.
Right.
Other
I have a
questions?
question, if that's all right.
Yeah, go for it.
What expectations did the Fulbright Commission have with like the results of your research? Did you have to check in with them, or were there requirements about like if and when it could be published and things like that?
For the Fulbright Commission?
Yeah, just like was there an oversight committee like checking in on how your research was progressing and what you could do with it once it was complete?
No, not in my experience, at least. It was only my regular UK committee that was checking in. And IRB also provided oversight, which, like the Institutional Review Board, I think maybe some of you have gone through that as well. I'm not really sure, but I had to get, from at least anthropology, I had to get special ethics permission to interview refugee women because they're a vulnerable population. But that was the only oversight committee I had, not necessarily Fulbright, other than people checking in once in a while, but not necessarily about research or being able to publish stuff.
And that's an excellent point. And for any of you that are going to do research with human subjects, you would have to get an IRB approval here, and sometimes in your host country as well. There are a few that will request that. But Fulbright doesn't censor your research or take control of it or expect you to present it in a certain way. It's your research product.
Which is really helpful if you're a researcher, because you have a little bit more freedom that you might not necessarily have in your respective departments.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Any other questions?
This is a bit of, I'm not sure if you'll be able to answer this, and it's kind of like of least importance maybe for everybody else here, but I'm married, so I didn't know what the rules are or the contingencies in place for being married and doing something like this. I'm assuming that they can't say no to you bringing your spouse along. I just didn't know what that looked like.
Dr. Whitlow?
Yeah. Oh, yes, they can say no. So you need to check with the host country. You need to read the grant, and it will say at the very bottom about dependents. And some countries are absolutely welcome, or dependents or connection, you know what I mean? They say absolutely bring a spouse, or and some countries will even offer a little enhancement to your stipends, not a ton of money, but your spouse can't work in that host country while they're there. And so they'll give you a little extra, so because you're feeding two people. But some countries say no, dependents, you can't bring them. We don't care if you're married or have kids or whatever. That's not what we offer for our grant. So you have to look at that if that's an important aspect for you, right, that you would go, if you got it, that both of you would go, then you want to make sure the country has that agreement up front in the grant thing, not try to negotiate it afterwards, because they probably won't do that with you. And we have had, one of the lecturers in the Honors College now did a Fulbright to Romania a couple of years ago and took his spouse and 2 children, right? So we have had various things where people did have a partner did take, but that's something you need to know is a possibility in the grant when you apply. So definitely read that grant description online when you look at the website, and it will be near the bottom of it, and they will say for sure.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I can't answer that because I'm not married. And I was actually told by another anthropologist, not with Fulbright, before I went. Well, for me personally, she said, don't go do research when you're in a relationship. But that was just, that's not my advice, it's just what she told me.
Yeah, it's a little late for that for me.
Yep, sorry.
And we have, obviously, we've had people too who left for the year to do their Fulbright, and their spouse visited them because they had a job here or a commitment here. So it isn't that you couldn't have someone come and visit you. People's families come. I mean, people do have, but in terms of living there permanently, getting that kind of spouse guest visa, they might not be open to that. So we've had those situations. One thing I should be clear about is, in general, Fulbright, like Armenia is obviously different, where she had to leave every 9 days. Most times they want you to spend your full Fulbright year in your host country. And you may have a small travel on a weekend to a nearby country or something. There are some students who are ETAs and they'll travel at the winter holiday break to some other countries. They understand that you will do that, but for the most part, they want you to be in the host country for the entire length of your grant, and they don't want people to be returning to the U.S. For example, I have had Fulbrights do that. I ran into a Fulbright one time here in town, like in the Kroger's or in the mall. And I was like, well, aren't you supposed to be in Mexico? And they were like, shh, they came back. But they were obviously in a country that was very close by. But you're not supposed to do that. In most countries, it wouldn't really be practical.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing, too. For those of you who might be considering medical school applications or law applications or something where you would have to come back for interviews, you need to get your acceptance done before you go on a Fulbright year, because they will not release you to come back constantly for medical school or law school, graduate school interviews. That wouldn't be practical for you. It wouldn't be financially practical either, but that's something you need to think about as well. And I've never had problems with a student deferring a medical school admission, a graduate school admission, or something like that for when they receive a Fulbright. People have been able to defer.
Can you talk a little bit more just about like your living situation and like day-to-day life
Yeah.
away from like the research aspect?
Day-to-day, yeah, I can easily talk about that. So I found an apartment through a family friend. She was actually living in Detroit, but she had an apartment in Armenia. She was originally from there. So again, a networking goddess, and somehow that paid off. So I found an apartment. It's like $400 a month, but that's just because I was in a country where the exchange rate was in our favor, fortunately. And on a day-to-day life, I would try to walk my dog, but it was hard because there were lots of big dogs, and he's a little Maltese. So after that, then I would either go to a cafe and write field notes, or like I wrote field notes every day. It's just about my habits, and also most of my time was spent networking and emailing people. I would stop by the UNHCR office like every few months because they're busy. I would make a calendar, all the relevant events related to my research, and I would also prioritize working out because what really threw me off in meeting, to be honest, is not having a structured schedule. Coming straight from a PhD program where, be it you're teaching, you're writing, you're taking classes, all this stuff is very structured. And it's less structured now. But when you're in Armenia or abroad and you don't necessarily have structure. So the first thing that I did was I took time to really settle in the first few weeks, find the grocery store, figure out how you're going to pay bills. Where do you pay bills? You go to a kiosk or to a store. So once you figure out the basics and you get your groceries, then I signed up for Armenian lessons because my Armenian was, it's okay, but it could definitely use improvement. So I did that, found a place in town, scheduled lessons, just give me structure. Found a gym to work out in, and just figure out the basics. So a typical day would be walking my dog, working out, going to a cafe, answering emails, working on my field notes, finding people to schedule interviews with, and then going to like a Syrian grocery store and really building relationships. So I didn't get interviews for a few months into it because you're really working on developing those relationships, and it takes a lot of time and effort. And for the population that I'm working with, it will really freak them out if you show up with like an audio recorder, like, hi, I'm coming from the US and I want to talk to you about why you fled from Syria. No, don't do that. So just really taking the time to develop those relationships. That was the daily life at the beginning, and then things quickly picked up really, really fast because people start to recognize you. They said as an anthropologist, they would invite me to things. And so it was, my social calendar was, a lot more busier than it is currently, but also we have a pandemic. So yeah, it was just, you amazed how quickly things snowball like that. So I'm not sure if that helped.
Yeah, I definitely did. And that was good advice about like making a schedule. Because even like during this pandemic, I've had to like somehow make a schedule for myself.
Right, otherwise you're gonna go nuts. Yeah, so, and that really helped with research too, because you taking the time at the beginning, it really allowed me to, I think in total I got about 50 interviews for not just the 9 months, but I was there because I'm back last summer to finish the research, but with a different grant, with the smaller summer grant. So probably for the 9 months that I was there, I had about 40 interviews. So, but that mostly happened in the second half. And also, if you're working with a different language, then you want to work on your skills, and you can't expect everyone to speak English, except for maybe some government workers or NGO workers who might have more interactions with English speakers.
Does Fulbright help with like your living situation, since like you, in your case you had help and you knew someone, but does Fulbright help in that process at all?
This is where I think Fulbright Armenia may have fallen a little bit short for people who didn't have those connections that I had. They were referred to like a real estate broker, which I don't know if I'd be necessarily comfortable dealing with that in a different country that I wasn't as familiar with. I mean, I don't use a real estate broker in the US currently, so that would kind of throw me off. What I would do is talk to other people, like alumni, who have worked in the country where you were. Ask them exactly what you asked me. What did you do for housing? Where did you go? What's the safe part of town that you feel comfortable living in?
And I think, again, that's one of those things that varies according to the country and the Fulbright Commission and how many Fulbrighters they get. And the other thing that's more difficult, too, is sometimes, for example, an English teaching assistant, there may be a similar person coming in from year to year in that town, and so they kind of pass the apartment along or the housing situation. Whereas for the research grants, they may be in a different part of the country every year, right? There isn't that way to say, oh, well, we'll just have you here, because they're so varied. So that is the other thing too. I think for the research grants, they often, many times those are older students or in PhD programs, and they have a tendency to say, you can manage it, and so there's probably less help maybe, whereas the ETAs can work with the schools they're going to be assigned and different things, I think. So that can really vary.
Right. For example, the other researcher that I was talking about earlier, the archaeologist from Cornell, she was kind of grandfathered into an environment through a previous researcher there, another archaeologist who was studying in Armenia. The person that she was grandfathered into, whose apartment, they were not from Fulbright, they were from another award. I think it was Boren, actually, which is another competitive award, I believe. I didn't get that, but I got Fulbright, so it's okay. And so that's how that connection happened, is exactly what Dr. Whitlow mentioned. Any other questions?
Thank you all so much. This has been a wonderful, lively conversation. You brought out things that I wouldn't have thought to mention, so it's been tremendously helpful. Thank you so much, Anaheen, for doing this. It's great to get to hear more about your year, myself, and also to have students benefit from your experience. So thank you all. I appreciate it very much, and we have recorded this, and so we'll get it up online that other students can benefit from our conversation today. And I hope those of you who are on the call will also reach out to me if you want to be an applicant, because I would be happy to answer more questions, and it will be good for me to know if you're going to be part of the UK cohort. That'll be exciting.
Yeah, and I want to add that you're welcome to contact me too. My email is my first and last name. I know it's hard to spell, but you should have access to it through email at eqy.edu. So you're welcome to contact me anytime.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thanks to all of you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
All right. Have a good night. See you.